So one thing that I think we can all connect on, that we all have in common is, I believe that most of us have some sort of subscription in our life. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do an informal poll right now. I'm gonna put a logo on screen, and I'm gonna ask you to stand up if you or someone in your house subscribes to this service. It's pretty simple. So you just stand up if you or someone. So you don't have to be the one paying for the service. If you or someone in your house is paying for the service, I need you to stand up because I think we're all subscribing to something. All right, here's the first one. Stand up if you or someone in your house subscribes to Netflix. I see you. All right, getting your Stranger Things on, I understand. All right, sit down, sit down, sit down. This one, I still don't understand why people are paying, but stand up if you or someone in your house subscribes to Hulu. I don't get that. I don't get that. Why are we paying to watch commercials? I don't understand that. All right, sit back down. Let's change genres for a minute. All right, we're going to change categories. If you or someone you know subscribes to Spotify, stand up. Okay. Sit back down. Let's switch again to back to our previous category. This next one, I made fun of it when it came out. I'm like, no one's going to pay for that. But to be honest with you, it's the only way I'm going to watch SummerSlam tonight. Stand up if you subscribe to Peacock. Okay, wow. A little sparse. Get all your old NBC episodes, I understand. Sit back down. Let's switch again to a competitor. How many of you guys subscribe to Apple Music? All right. Some loyal fans. Okay, sit back down. One last one that I think will unite the room. How many of you or someone in your house subscribes to Disney Plus? Wow. I love it. Sit back down. So, subscription is where we live. I mean, at any moment, we can catch up on Stranger Things. We can watch Obi-Wan Kenobi fight Darth Vader. Or if you're like me, you can listen to the latest Harry Styles song on repeat right now, as it was, like on Spotify, right? But all of this, I think, comes from the number one subscription service that isn't really a pay subscription service, YouTube. Because on YouTube, whether you're watching Mr. Beast, Dude Perfect, whoever it is, everybody who creates on YouTube, they all say like and subscribe, like and subscribe. And we have this culture, which is just how we are as a people, how we do things. That's what culture means. We have this culture now of what it means to subscribe. So when we subscribe, it means we want to follow you and we want all of the content that you have. However, what's happened now, part of our culture, the way we act, is that when we disagree or we become bored, we can unsubscribe. And we don't just subscribe to content you can watch or listen to or play games on. We actually subscribe to more than that. If I were to listen to your broadcast of your life, if I were to tune into what your life's all about and really listen to what you're subscribing to, I think we would all find that we're subscribing to way more than just movies and TVs and games and music. We're actually subscribing to some ideas that we treat as truth. This past summer, I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of middle school students and have been asking the question, what are you subscribing to that's become a truth? And I asked them to finish a statement, and I took a list down, and I want to read it to you because tonight, what we're talking about is way more than what we can consume in content. It's what we've decided to follow in our life. Here's some of the ideas that middle school students have said that they subscribe to, and they kind of finished the statement for me. I subscribe to the idea that I will never be enough for my parents' approval. I subscribe to the idea that I need to change my identity as much as possible so that I will be noticed or even belong. I subscribe to the idea that I will never have a true friend. I subscribe to the idea that I am actually unlovable. I subscribe to the idea that I can never change. I'm always going to be this way because that's just who I am. I subscribe to the idea that I'm defined by failure and by success. I subscribe to the idea that I need to cross lines in relationships in order to be loved and accepted. I subscribe to the idea that if I have enough of the things that I will be finally happy if I just consume. I subscribe to the idea that hope isn't for everyone. I subscribe to the idea that I'm only supposed to love the people that I like. And we have more and more and more things we could add to that list. We subscribe to these ideas as if they were truth in our life, and we live by them. And what's even crazier is that sometimes when it comes to the way of Jesus, we treat it as if it's like a subscription service. When we want to follow what he's all about, we subscribe. But the minute it gets hard or challenging, we unsubscribe. And here's what you need to know. If you're going to subscribe to the way of Jesus, which many of you did for the first time last night, and some of you did a long time ago, when you subscribe to the way of Jesus, there is only one way to subscribe, all in. And in our story tonight, which you've already heard several times, we have Jesus talking to a potential subscriber, somebody who is thinking about subscribing to the way of Jesus, but he's on the fence. So I want to crack open the scriptures right now, and in Luke chapter 10, I want you to see not only what he has to say, but also I want you to see that this subscriber says something in the story in Luke chapter 10 that I believe is the reason why we have Jesus even telling this parable. Now, you've been listening to parables all week. You've been listening to the stories of Jesus that he uses to try to say and teach things. But in this story, I think the reason why Jesus had to tell the story of the Good Samaritan is because of what this man says. And I think that if we were going to be honest, you and I, sometimes this is how we subscribe. In Luke chapter 10, we're going to be in verse 25. There's this guy who's really smart, and he has a conversation with Jesus. Luke chapter 10, verse 25, it says this: One day, an expert in the religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question, "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" Like, he has this one question that honestly a lot of people really want to know. Even today, people are like, if there's a heaven and a hell, how do I make sure that I'm in the right place? People were asking then, and you're asking now. And so Jesus responds and he says, "What does the law of Moses say? Have you read it?" And if you don't know who Moses is one of the historical awesome figures of the Bible. He was a man that was chosen by God to speak for him to his people. In fact, if you've ever heard of the 10 Commandments, Moses got to go up on the mountain, hang out with God, this thunder and lightning moment, and he got the 10 Commandments to bring it down to the people. He's a really important person in God's story. So Jesus says, "Hey, what did the law of Moses say?" The man answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." So the man knows the right answers, and if we're going to be honest, some of us that have been in church for a while, we know all the right answers. Like, we could raise our hand in any youth group, any small group, any setting like this, and we know what the Bible says about subscribing to the way of Jesus. But it's what happens next in this that I think sometimes, even though we know the answers, we miss the truth. See, it's possible to know all of the answers about the way of Jesus, but to completely miss the truth that he is bringing to the table. So this man has this, and I love this. Jesus affirms, and he says, "Right, do this and you will live." And then here comes the moment that the reason our story exists tonight. Verse 29, it says the man wanted to justify his actions. So he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" There's a yellow on screen. I want you to read this with me. When it gets to the yellow part, I need you to speak up and say those words, because this is the moment that you and I have to have together about subscribing to the way of Jesus. It says the man wanted to justify his actions. So he asked Jesus, "And is my..." How many of you guys have ever gotten busted by your mom and dad and you've had to justify your actions? You've had to explain yourself. You've got to explain yourself, right? "Hey, Mom, I promise this is not how it happened. See, I was here and you said," this is what we do sometimes. We go, "But you said the rule was," I was not supposed to do that, but I didn't do that. I just did this. You see, we understand this guy. We spend a lot of our life trying to justify why we do things, whether they're right or wrong. We look for loopholes. This guy was a smart man. He was trying to find the loophole. He was trying to make sure that he was on the right side of God. Don't miss this. When you subscribe to the way of Jesus, and you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, all in. The minute we ask the question, who is my neighbor, we have completely missed the way of Jesus. You see, what happens sometimes when we ask the question, who is my neighbor, we have categories of people, right? We have categories of people that we love, people that we kind of get along with, and people that we don't like. In fact, sometimes we give them a name with this word, those people. Students, you need to know something. The minute that we start classifying anybody with a those people tag in our life, we have missed the point of the way of Jesus. You see, subscribing to the way of Jesus, loving God and loving our neighbor, it's not a question of who is my neighbor. It's a question of look around you because we are all neighbors. We are all God's people. We are all made in his image. But sometimes what we do is we classify and we part up people into different categories and we say, this group over here I'm going to love, this group, those people, not going to love them. And if you ask the question, if you begin by saying, who is my neighbor, we've missed the way of Jesus. And that's why I believe that he had to teach through this story. So if you're a note taker, I want to show you through this story that he tells 3 ways that you can live out the way of Jesus, that you can subscribe to the way of Jesus and how to love your neighbor. This story gives us really practical things. So in the story, we've got this journey going on, and it's between Jerusalem and Jericho, and it says a Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. He was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. Here's what you need to know. This is not a road that's like I-65 or 71 or any of those major highways. This is a road that's tucked in between hills. And it was often common for bandits, people that wanted to steal, they would hide out behind some of the rocks just to attack people because they couldn't see it coming. So Jesus tells the story that this man is half dead on the road, and we have 2 people that come along right away. A priest, which if you don't know who that is, he worked at the temple. His job was to know God and to help his people know God. But he walked around this man. And at first you look at the priest and you go, well, I mean, that's a mean dude. He's not very loving, but he had a loophole because if you were a priest, the law said you cannot touch a dead person, otherwise you're going to be off the job. So he walked around him. He had a loophole. He could justify himself. He had a good reason for doing so. Then another guy, one of the temple helpers, often called a Levite. Everybody say Levite. He was the guy that was the assistant to the priest, and he had the same rule. You cannot touch a dead person or anyone's dying because you'll be unclean. You can't go back to your job. They've got families to feed. Their livelihood depended on this. So there's a loophole. But then we have our Samaritan. And it says, a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. And you need to know that Samaritans back in those days were those people. They weren't allowed to go to the temple to worship God. In fact, they had to come up with their own location on top of a mountain to worship him. And everybody treated them as the bottom of society. And yet, Jesus chose this character to teach us 3 things about what it means to love your neighbor. So if you're taking notes, this is the first thing I want you to know. He saw him. And so loving our neighbor means opening our eyes. Everybody say, open your eyes. We are so blind because we're so busy and we're so focused on ourselves that sometimes we miss the opportunities to love people. And I believe in this moment, the Samaritan was on the road, y'all, and he saw the half-dead human, and you know what he saw when he had his eyes open? I don't think he just saw another man who needed help. I think he saw himself. He's like, that could be me. And so one of the first ways, if you're going to subscribe to the way of Jesus, if you're going to love your neighbor, you need to ask Jesus, hey, Jesus, open my eyes today to see what you see. Because otherwise, we're just going to see what we want to see. But when you see what he wants to see, we can see our neighbors that need our attention, need our love, that need our presence. Here's the second thing that he does. He had compassion on him. He had compassion. And what does compassion mean? Well, compassion is not just, oh, poor dude. Oh, man, that's a sad story. No, what compassion literally is putting yourself in their situation. Putting yourself. And so number 2 is we literally need to put ourselves in that person's situation. So often, the reason that we have so much division, the reason we have so many groupings of people, and we have those people and this people and our people, when it should just be God's people, it's because we're unwilling to listen and put ourselves in their shoes. We've got to take time to consider what is it that this person's going through. You see, if we're unwilling to do that, it's going to be really hard to love our neighbor. So many problems in our lives could be fixed if we would just take the time to love our neighbor by listening to our neighbor and understanding what they're going through. There are a lot of things going on around us right now that if we would just stop to listen and ask the question, hey, what's it like to be you? I think we might have more moments like this. The third part of the thing that we do happens in the story, and I love what goes down next, is that he went over to him. The Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil, wine, and bandaged them. He put the man on his own donkey. He took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. If the bill runs higher than this, then I'll pay you the next time. And so here's the third thing. You have your eyes opened. Your ears are listening. Hey, what's it like to be in your situation? And there's only one thing left to do. Take personal action. Take personal action. We can't just walk around after we see the person that God's put on our path, whoever it is. It might be a brother, it might be a sister, it may be somebody in your school, it might be somebody on your team, that might be the next worker that takes your order. It might be somebody in your life that you have your eyes open, and then when you listen and you hear their situation, here's what we can't do. If we're going to subscribe to the way of Jesus, if we're going to go all in, and if we truly love God, we cannot sit back and hope somebody else does the work of loving that neighbor. No, we've got to take personal action. And middle school students, you need to know something, is that you have everything you need to take personal action. You don't have to wait till you grow up. You don't have to wait someday till you graduate, or sometime when you get more influence as a person, or if you get more friends, or you have more following, or more people viewing your life. You don't have to wait for any of that. You can begin opening your eyes, putting yourselves in people's situations, and taking action today. There's 2 stories I want to kind of close to show you what does this look like, because if you don't know how it looks like to live this out, you may miss what it means to subscribe to the way of Jesus. And here's the thing. You can have your Bibles, you can sing the songs, you can attend the services, you can go on trips and miss the way of Jesus. Because the way of Jesus truly is loving our neighbors the way we love ourselves. Last summer, I was in a room like this, and I saw a love your neighbor moment that was really cool. It was pretty simple. There was a young man that came on the trip that had never held a Bible before. I want you to think about that. He never held a Bible before. He's never read it before. And so when I got up to preach and I said, turn to the book of John, I had to slow things down a little bit, because I'm recognizing there's more and more of you that just have never checked this thing out, which is not a problem, by the way. If you're here and you've never done it, I don't want you to be intimidated by that. I want you to be encouraged that this is the right room to say, how do I find it? And so I said, hey, turn to a neighbor and ask for help. If you don't know how to get there, there's a table of contents. And what happened next was mind-blowing, because this young man came and he got in fights, almost got sent home the first day of mix because he just got in so many fights. And yet, when that moment came, he looked around, and the only person he could turn to was one of the dudes that he almost got in a fight with. He said, can you explain to me how this works? The small group leader captured this picture after the session that's pretty powerful. This is my brother right here, and he is listening for the first time. How do you read the Bible? And this is a love your neighbor moment, because he put himself in his shoes. He's been around the Bible his whole life. He just knows how to get around, but he saw him put himself in his situation, and what he's doing with his hands right there is so powerful. He's just saying, this is what a table of contents is all about. It's a love your neighbor moment, so small, but so powerful. And now he's part of a youth group. Now he has a Bible, and now he knows he can go to somebody and say, how do you get there? What does this mean? And I don't know about you, but when you're lost and you're alone and you feel like you're the only one that doesn't know something, when you have someone in your life that loves you and is willing to help you, it's life-changing. That's a small way of loving your neighbor. But this next one's a little bit bigger. Last few years, it's been chaos. Like what you are having to grow up in right now, I want you to know, like I've got a middle schooler at home right now, and I've got a high schooler, and what you're growing up in right now, I never had to grow up in. Like I see what you have to do. Some of you go to school and you wonder what's gonna happen next. And over the last few years, our city and the greater country, there's just been a lot of things happening, especially when it comes to the conversation on race. The racial divide in our city is so wide, and yet it's been below the surface for so long, and it finally popped out into the public eye in 2020. And maybe you saw the news coverage, maybe you were around it, but people started to march and show just how big the divide is, and we needed to stop and listen to them. But one of the nights when people were walking and wanted their voices to be heard, and they're just trying to share, there are so many hurt people that just need to be listened to. Well, one of those nights was going on, things kind of amped up and they got a little crazy, and it's no secret in this room that there was a lot of police on this side and everybody on this side. That's why I want to show you this picture. It's not a picture that I can fully put my shoes in yet. Like I'm still trying to understand all of the tension in this moment, but you don't have to be there to know this is an incredible moment. All I know is this officer was in trouble. And these men who were part of that march that day saw things amping up, saw things like getting out of control, and they stood by and protected him. I want to share with you a couple quotes. One of the guys, Darren Lee, he said, I really thought that it was that moment. Protect him, it's not his fault. Ricky McClellan said, a human was in trouble, a right is a right. And these dads stood up and powerfully loved their neighbor, even with all of the things that were going on, even all of the hurt and division. They said, a human is a human, and they showed such an amazing example of what it means to love your neighbor. And we have a lot to learn from these men about what it means to subscribe to the way of Jesus, because they modeled for the world what it looks like. The only question is, are you a subscriber? Subscribing to the way of Jesus means going all in. It doesn't mean just being an attender. Subscribing to the way of Jesus means loving people, all people. Subscribing to the way of Jesus means asking more questions and listening than speaking some days. Subscribing to the way of Jesus is loving our neighbors the way that we want to be loved. And some of us haven't been loved well, and so we don't know how to do that. But this is what I know. The reason that Jesus started that whole thing by love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength is we can start with this. We are loved by a mighty God who loves you regardless of what you've done. And we need to take the power of that love and use it by subscribing to the way of Jesus and loving our neighbors everywhere we go. And what's at stake is huge. You see, if you grow up realizing it's normal to love our neighbors and not part people out into those people and this people, if you do this now while you're in middle school, do you realize you have the power to transform your schools? Some of you will be the first in your homes to transform your home from a place of tension, a place of frustration, a place of division, to a place of love. God will use you to completely transform wherever you're at. That's the power of subscribing to the way of Jesus and loving our neighbor. We're gonna do something a little different tonight. We're gonna worship from right where you're at. You can stand up right now without saying a word. And when the band starts playing, I don't want you to rush the stage because I don't want you to miss this, because I want you to think about what it means to subscribe to the way of Jesus. Because God's love should compel us to love our neighbors. Like even in this room, there are people that have not felt the love of Jesus even while we've been at Mix. And now is the moment for you to transform from people who just know all the answers about Jesus, but actually start living the way of Jesus. Now is the moment to stop justifying, I look like a good kid because I don't say that many cuss words, I don't view these things, I don't do this. It's not even about that. Now is the time to say, subscribing to the way of Jesus means loving God and loving people wherever I go by opening our eyes, putting ourselves in their situation, and taking action. The question is, are you a subscriber? Because it means going all in. Let's pray. God, you have equipped this room to change the world one person at a time by loving our neighbors. Maybe tonight we can just start saying, Jesus, will you open our eyes to who our neighbors are? Open our eyes to what's possible when we see people the way you see them. We need more people to step up like my brothers did that night. And in spite of there being different sides and different things, they stood up and they said, a human is a human. Lord, may we humanize more people in our life by seeing them the way you see them. May we listen and ask questions first so that we can understand their situation. May no middle schooler ever go alone in this world ever again, because this room stood up to say, I'm going to love my neighbor, I'm going to have my eyes open, and I'm never going to put them in a category ever again. It won't be easy. But God, you loved us first. So we use that love as fuel to love our neighbors.